Soon I'm going to be tasting these straight from the field. Life is pretty good. Hasn't always been that way, I can tell you that. I know that in the last while I've had quite a few new subscribers. For example, one of the reasons is this whole vote botting thing. That was one time when I got lots of new subscribers. So I'm still grateful to the old vote botter, whoever did it back then. But anyway, a lot of my newer subscribers won't have been following my channel for this long. And obviously, I can't expect people to go trawling through my back catalogue either. That would be a bit silly. People just don't have the time, and I don't expect you to do it. But if you've been with my channel a bit longer, you will know that I've, gone through a rougher patch as well in the past, starting about 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago now. And I made a playlist about it, called My Experiences with Lexapro. Now Lexapro is a SSRI. It's, if I remember it correctly, that stands for Selective Serotonin Reuptake Inhibitor. Pretty sure about the last 3 words, I'm not sure about the first one. But anyway, and the thing with Lexapro is it keeps your serotonin levels higher in your brain by delaying its reuptake into your body, and increased serotonin levels are associated with an increased sense of well-being. So what was the problem? Well, I was suffering from depression. Now, I made a playlist about it, and in which I started off when I got a diagnosis of depression, and I started off using Lexapro, and then in my playlist I related my experiences with the drug, and then later on in the process my experiences coming down from the drug and discontinuing it, which was a very interesting subject indeed, because coming down from Lexapro was not easy. I can tell you that. It took me over a month. About this time last year, I was finally completely rid of it, after a month of withdrawal symptoms. Now, the withdrawal symptoms of Lexapro, in my case, consisted of dizzy spells, for want of a better word. I just got the occasional, initially very regularly, later about once a day, but got this sort of strange dizziness, and then it would slowly go away. It was very unpleasant, but of course, knowing that it was only a side effect of coming down from the drug, and that it would eventually disappear, made it bearable. But still, it was quite unpleasant. And I can imagine that people who are not in a happy frame of mind would find it very difficult to cope with it, and would be tempted for that alone to go back to taking the drug. Thankfully, that wasn't the case in my case. Now, okay, let me explain what the situation is a year later. And the reason why I'm making this video now is that I still get the occasional PM from people who chance upon my playlist and who are in positions, in situations that I was in 2 years ago, who are now just starting to take Lexapro, or who have just been prescribed Lexapro and who've started taking it, and who are looking around the internet obviously to see if they can see other people with similar experiences. And occasionally I get the PM of people who were following me back then and say like, hey, how are you doing nowadays? Are you still feeling okay? And so on. So I thought, well, it is now over a year since I last took any medication. So I think maybe this is a good time for an update. So here goes. Well, I can tell you that a year on, I see very little indication that I need to worry about ever having to go back on this drug, and certainly not in the foreseeable future. I am currently very happy within myself. But again, it is now a year on, over a year on, since I last had to take this medicine, and now in hindsight I can see why my situation was such a success story, why in my particular case it worked so well. And this then leads me to look at other situations and see and understand why in some situations this might not be such a good idea. Although I am of course only a patient. I am not a medical professional, and I can only speak for myself. But if you're somebody who suffers from, say, chronic depression, I am really not certain how useful a drug like Lexapro would be to you. Because it is, in the end, it is something that you will get used to. And if your depression is caused by a chronic underlying problem, rather than, like in my case, a very clear, easily definable source, then eventually you will have gotten so used to the Lexapro that your negative thought patterns will be able to surface again. And then, what are you going to do? I don't know. But if you were in the sort of boat, if you are in the sort of boat that I was in, then yes, I think it can be very useful. But I also think that one reason why in my case it was so successful was because I was aware of what was wrong and what needed to be done about it. You see, I was stuck in this really shitty company, in a really shitty job. And that, it took nearly 7 years. And I'm not saying that for 7 years it was all gloom and doom either. Because initially I quite enjoyed working there. And I developed some stuff that was pretty groundbreaking for what they were doing. And it really enabled certain things for them. But funnily enough, in the last couple of years while I was there, a large part of the company, it had grown significantly since I first joined, a large part of the company started developing in .NET, Visual Basic .NET and ASP.NET, and went the web route, the way of the future as it was seen there. And I, which is often the case in cases of something that is a success story, you get sort of stuck in what you're good at. But if that is then a technology that the company is allowing to be left behind, then you are also left behind. And that is something that to me was completely intolerable. I am somebody who needs to be working in a creative capacity. I need to be working on something new, to develop something big. Not to be sitting there on top of an established product, tinkering with it and maintaining it. Obviously that needs to be done, and I see the importance of it, but it is not something that I could see myself doing long term. And it had become apparent that what I was supposed to be doing in that company, the way they saw me progressing in that company, if you would even call it that, was by sitting on an established product and maintaining it. And even when the product was eventually moved into the new mainstream product and moved to .NET, I got moved into data warehousing, where again I was looking at established data and merely devising ways of getting it out of there. Not very satisfactory. And after about 2 years of this, I had severely gotten depressed. And in hindsight, I know that's what had happened. At the time, I didn't realize it. I just felt unhappy. I just felt unmotivated, and so on and so forth. But now I realize in hindsight that I had allowed myself to slide into depression. And depression is a nasty, nasty thing. Especially in a situation like this. Because the problem is not so much that you find yourself in this slump. The problem is that even though you can rationalize that there are ways out of it, anything that you can see, any option that you can see is available to you, seems like an insurmountable mountain to climb. It all seems too much, impossible. This was back in 2007, when the market wasn't nearly as depressed as it is now, the economic market. And yet, I was sitting there in this shitty dead-end job, thinking that for somebody like me, it would be difficult to go out there into the marketplace and find a good alternative position. And it all came to a head in September 2007, when it just became too much for me and I had to take some time off work. But I was lucky. Again, in hindsight, I was lucky because I knew for a fact what the cause of my depression was. I just didn't have the gumption. I didn't have the get up and go to do something about it. So when in September I finally cracked and had to take time off work, I went to the doctor and he diagnosed. At first he gave me something, I think it was Xanax or something like that, which in hindsight was obviously completely wrong, because if I was already in a slump, this slumped me even more. And then he diagnosed depression and he put me on Lexapro. Lexapro is an odd little drug, I can tell you that. I don't know why people call antidepressants, why they call them happy pills, because they're not happy pills. And this was something that I found a little bit strange at first. I didn't realize. And I started taking Lexapro, and after a week I felt exactly the same. I felt no different whatsoever. And after 2 weeks I still felt like nothing had changed. I felt no effects whatsoever. In hindsight, of course, I can say, hang on a second, this is actually a good thing. You don't want a drug that clearly leaves you feeling like you're under the influence of something or other. This had no such effect. It just seemed to be doing nothing. And then one day, about 3 weeks later, I realized something. I realized that anytime I needed to do something, whereas beforehand I just couldn't be asked, I now just got up and did it. I thought, hang on a second, it is actually working. I didn't think I felt any different, but it was obviously working, because suddenly I could motivate myself again to do something. And at that point I decided, okay, enough is enough. Now, there also was a push from where I was working as well, because when I eventually returned to work, the bastards refused to pay me sick leave. Obviously, in the eyes of some people, depression is not seriously enough an illness, and I should have just come to work. Obviously that was never said to my face. But anyway, that aside, I eventually returned to work and I decided that enough is enough, and I was going to get a new job. And I just decided to do that. And I was happy to do it. And I was happy to get out the old CV and brush up the old CV and get it all together again and start sending it off to the agents and seeing what was out there. And within a few weeks I had found myself a new job, and I was out of there, and I was leaving it all behind. Funnily enough, the new job turned out to be even worse than the old one. But even that, no, let me leave it there. The new job turned out to be even worse than the old job, right? But even so, I eventually, within about 3 months after joining the new company, discontinued Lexapro. That was fun, I can tell you that. And you can look at my older videos about coming down from Lexapro, how much fun it really wasn't. But I was still on a high. I was still happy to be out of the old place. And I had been, while I was on Lexapro, it's another thing that you should do when you're taking a drug like that, you are going to experience more positive thought patterns. And it's like you're training. You should be practicing those positive thought patterns so that they will persist after you stop taking the drugs. And I clearly succeeded in this, because after I came down from the drug, I eventually, things happened in my new job, and it became apparent that it was even worse than the old one, and eventually they let me go. Yes, it was not my decision to move. I also think that some redundancy considerations were in play there, but obviously it was very easy to look at somebody who is in a probationary period and make up reasons. I won't go into any further. But I was still able, even though at that stage I was no longer taking Lexapro, I was still able to do the whole thing again and go contacting agencies, go looking for a new job, and I found yet another new job, and I've been in there almost a year now, and I'm as happy as a pig in shit. And I do thank Lexapro for making this possible, for giving me the gumption at the right time to do something about my problems. But that is where the important thing lies here. If you are suffering from a chronic type of depression, I don't think Lexapro is going to help you at all. But if you're like my case, if you are able to identify the cause of your depression clearly, then I can imagine how Lexapro would help you take the actions you need to take to address your problem. But do, therefore, that's what I would urge anybody considering taking this medication, do use this as an opportunity to address your problems. Start thinking of a strategy of getting out of the situation that's causing your problem. And then when Lexapro has given you that motivation, that extra gumption to do things, use it to tackle your problem. And secondly, like I said earlier, practice the more positive thought patterns, so that when you do eventually come down, they are something that you've become used to and that you have no problem perpetuating into the future. For me, it has been very, very helpful indeed. And I hope that people watching this will consider, if, how, and whether it will be an option that might be useful to them. Anyway, that's the story, that's the update. Lexapro 1 year later, after discontinuing the drug, I see absolutely no reason why I would ever have to go back on it. Thank you very much for watching, and reboot your mind.